most important things you need to keep in mind when you're teaching beginning band is to let your body work for you. You want to avoid bad habits, but you also want to be comfortable. Don't ever use the word tension when you're teaching students. That's a top secret teacher word. Also, don't touch kids. Use your eyes to make adjustments. When you introduce good posture, you can relate it to walking. You want to keep the same posture when you're standing still as when you're walking. It helps keep things all fluid.
So you want to have kids walk around the room, and at this point you really want to observe each of their bodies and how the natural shape of their hands. And so you want to point out to them the natural shape and use of their body parts. Point out how the skeleton supports the muscles and the rib cage is held off of your stomach by your lower back. Point out the natural position of the hands and arms. They fall inward, which is important later for hand position for all the instruments, and point out the natural slope of their shoulders. Also, two important questions to ask them is how does it look and how does it feel? And we'll answer how does it look and they can answer how does it feel. Their arms should be held away from their body, and just they become aware of where their air goes when they're breathing naturally through their nose.
Yeah, when you recreate this feeling when breathing through the mouth, you explain why you breathe through the mouth and rather than the nose. One thing to keep in mind is you don't cap the breath, so it's either the air is either going in or out, not stopping in between. And then while breathing, you also want to think of their mouth shape and keeping the tongue low to the bottom of the teeth.
Okay, so when it comes to creating an organized learning environment for your students, the first thing you want to do is not have chairs and stands within your classroom for the first few weeks. It's important that the room is open and nice for them and free of unnecessary equipment that they don't need. And this helps give you the space to teach them where you want them to sit, where you want their stuff to be, and it gives you an opportunity to teach them, like, when it comes to the end of class, where their stuff should be, and giving them that time to practice that as well.
And along with the organized structure of it, when you're storing instruments, if you keep bigger instruments, if you have the space for lockers, make sure you put those in other areas so again they're not distracting and they're not in the way of teaching. And people with smaller instruments can probably have it by their chairs, just to eliminate distractions and keep the focus in the class. But it depends on the space that you have in your room, because not every band room has a bunch of space for that. So do as best as you can with the space that you have.
And the next thing is class structure. You want to begin and end your class the same way every day so that the students have that feeling of a structure. And even if you don't have a bell within your school to tell you when classes start and when classes end, have your own way of doing that so your students can get used to that. And when it comes to your actual lessons, it is recommended to devote certain segments of your class to certain information for your students. But if you don't get to every single segment of that day that you wanted, it's okay to push it off and just making sure that you cover it at some point in time that week. Weekly expectations are better than daily.
And have lesson plans.
Yes. We talked about classroom setup. Classroom setup is a very important thing you have to think about, especially in your beginning band classroom. Let's start with posture. One of the most important things, especially with wind players, is you have to check their posture. And so we can use the sit, stand, and sit method. I'll give you a demonstration. You want to have the students stand up in front of their chair, straight back, good posture, all that stuff. You're going to have them sit down, and this should be their playing position. Do not let them adjust, slouch, move their arms around, try to crack their backs or anything. And just have them stand up again and sit and get them used to that posture. Their knee position is going to be different according to the height of each student. You want to have the knees either at level or below the hips to allow the room for the most air. Also, when you're setting up, you want to have it in a half circle or an arc with about a chair space in between, depending on the instrument. You have to have enough room for your students to be able to play their instruments, as well as enough room for you to easily access any student in the classroom. Because you're constantly assessing, and if you see someone doing something wrong and you want to go adjust them, but you have to like fumble around and like get through stands, it's going to slow down progress for everybody in the classroom. Also, you want to make sure they can see you, and yeah, let's see. Oh, I also highly do not recommend using a full circle unless you have 2 instructors, as well as don't put kids out of your peripherals, because that gives them less opportunity to be assessed by you and less room for development.
So when talking about correspondence, you have to think about when you're going to start that, and it's always going to start before the students are actually in your classroom. You're going to talk to the parents before they get to class about the local music companies and their services. You're going to talk to them about your classroom procedures and expectations, the practice sheet expectations, and all the concert information, so it doesn't come as a surprise when the concert actually arrives. And then you're going to continue that correspondence throughout the school year with them, so they don't forget that concert information and what the students need to be wearing. You need to be talking to them about the extra rehearsals and why they're required for the concert. You also need to talk about, if you have multiple directors, who the students are going to be contacting directly based off of who their instructors are. And then you're also going to keep walking them through your grading expectations, the consequences for not doing the practice sheets, your supply lists, your tardy policy, all your rules throughout the classroom and the hallways that you have. And you're just generally setting up a good overall connection with the parents. That way, if there are any concerns, they are able to come talk to you without hesitation.
First, start talking about breathing. One of the things we want to talk about first is having the kids get used to it. So we want to have them stand up, sit down, kneel, lay down, and we just want to have them practice breathing in the mouth and out the mouth. Because when we try and breathe in through our nose, we don't get a lot of breath support, and we just fill up the top part of our lungs and not the top all the way down to the bottom. Because when we breathe in music, we want to always think about filling up all the way down to the bottom of our rib cage. Then the next thing that we want to talk about is our tongue a teeny bit. We want our tongue to just be natural in our mouth, and Tristan will talk about that a little bit more.
So the tongue is important for the airflow to come in and out of the mouth when breathing. And it says that if the tongue sits in this position where it is just lying on the tissue on the bottom of your mouth, that the student will feel cool air go over the tongue because the temperatures in the room will be cooler than the temperatures in the mouth. And so if the students do this and don't feel any cool air, the tongue might be in the wrong position, like it might be too far back, it might be arched, which are both incorrect for taking in air. Also, when the air goes out, the student will feel warm air because the temperatures of the body is warmer than the temperatures outside in the room. So this is like a cool tool that you can have your students use in order to monitor their breathing process as they're playing their instruments. And then it also talks about the speed of the air and how it's important for focus on the direction of the airflow, whether it's coming in or out. Dr. Hofer always said that breathing should be a fluid motion in and out. So it's important to talk about the direction with your students. Cool.
All right, so natural posture is pretty imperative when it comes to playing your instrument. And as you may know already, students throughout the day will most likely not sit with the best posture. So let's just go over quickly how we want our students to sit in the band room. So we want their feet to be just slightly wider than shoulder width in front of their chair, and then we want them to be able to sit down and stand up without any extra exhaustion of the body, and you want to be able to keep the upper body in the same position, being able to sit down and stand up. Now, when they're starting out, we want them to be able to just keep their feet flat on the ground, shoulder width apart like this, but as they become more adept with playing their instrument and more comfortable with their body position and things like that, then they can start to adjust their feet to make it more comfortable to them, as long as they're balanced and have good posture and things like that. Also, when they're starting out, they got their feet like this, flat on the ground. We want their stand to be just like this. We want this middle spoke to be in between their feet. That way, if it's like this, we don't have anyone doing stuff like this, putting their feet on the stand and stuff like that. So you want this middle spoke to be in between your feet, just like that. And for our upper body position, we want them to take the small of their back towards their stomach until they feel their ribs aren't pressing against the stomach area to get that nice upper body position. And students should feel comfortable and balanced in this position, and so they can play their instrument and feel comfortable and natural. And in this position, you want to keep your feet relaxed so they're not tense. You're not like curling your toes in your shoes or anything like that. Just keep it nice, relaxed, upper body just like this, and then you're ready to play.
The important thing to remember when you're teaching good articulation in your band classes is that the tongue should be in a natural, relaxed position, the one you often use when in conversation, and it shouldn't be, when you are articulating, it shouldn't be a back and forth motion. It should be more of an up and down motion, and it should be touching off of the teeth. And within any given style of articulation, you know, whether that's a to, do, thu, lu type of articulation, it needs to be placed at the same spot every single time you're articulating. It shouldn't be all over the inside of your mouth. And you also need to make sure that your students are using enough air to support that articulation. If they're using a weak airstream, their articulation is going to start to sound very lazy and not the clear and concise articulation that you want. Within repeated passages like offbeat passages or really long duration passages, your students are going to need to energize their articulations as those passages go on, because their articulations will start to sound very lazy and they'll start to drag. When having your students practice their articulation, you often will have them vocalize and form their embouchure as they're vocalizing it. And this can be used with 2 fingers to kind of place at the side of your mouth to keep your embouchure firm and set. And you want to make sure that their embouchure has nothing to do with the articulation process. If their embouchure is moving every single time they're tonguing, that's a problem that you're going to have to solve later on in the future. And you can often have your students practice on mouthpieces, head joints, or mouthpiece barrels of clarinets, which will often later on reveal many mistakes that were previously hidden that you didn't know before.
For teaching music in class, you're going to teach it first as music is written on a staff. You're going to teach the staff first. And the staff consists of 5 lines and 4 spaces. And then there are symbols within the staff that you're going to teach. And these symbols are the notes, which is when you make a sound, rests, which is when you're silent, clefs, which allow you to assign specific names to notes, bar lines, which are vertical lines inserted to create a parameter within the staff, and then the measures, which is the name for these parameters, and then time signature, which I'll go into in a little bit. We have the musical alphabet, which is the first 7 letters of the alphabet, which are used in music. If you want to teach pitch going up, you're going to teach the alphabet going from A to G. And then if you want to teach pitch going down, you're going to teach the alphabet going from G to A. And then for time signature, it contains of 2 numbers. And the top number identifies the number of pulses placed in each measure, and the bottom number identifies the symbol that receives the pulse. And when you introduce this to your class, you're going to introduce the top number first to the students. For treble and bass clef, when you teach that, you're going to teach it on the grand staff, and you're going to assign names to designated lines and spaces. Always teach the clefs together as a grand staff and not separately. And it's suggested to memorize the lines and spaces from the bottom of the staff to the top of the staff.
So this last section on pulse is pretty short. The first thing he talks about is relating the musical pulse to the pulse of the body. That's something that kids are a lot more familiar with than a musical pulse. So the pulse in our body of our heart has two parts, but these are uneven, whereas our musical beat should be even all the time. And so he says that students may have trouble using their foot to show the speed of the pulse. I don't know why he only talks about the foot specifically, but he says if they do, one thing you can try is just having them walk and count the pulse out loud as they do so. And if they're still having trouble, you can move their foot smoothly for them. There's a couple ways you can do that. One is kind of like you're fitting a shoe, so you have them make their ankle really soft and relaxed, and then use your thumb and your middle finger to move their foot up and down. Or you can also carefully put your foot on top of theirs to do the same thing. But either way, as you do so, you're going to want to say 1 up, 2 up, and so on and so forth, so that they're learning to really count the beat, to subdivide, and to feel it properly. And so you never want to use this exact same pulse over and over again, the same speed, especially with beginners. And you also don't really want to start them with the metronome. You want to gradually start moving them to the metronome once they can begin to control the rhythm through counting activities.